Battles with Bits of Rubber, the podcast about making prosthetics. Please choose from the following options so we may direct your call. Press 1 if you have poured up a silicone mold and forgotten to add catalyst. Press 2 if you have taken in a job only to realize you are woefully underqualified, but it's too late to back out. Press 3 if you need to get responses for a survey you are doing for college. Press 4 if you have been asked to work for exposure and the director needs a lift to the location. For all other inquiries, or to speak to a bearded workshop monkey in overalls who quotes obscure lines from 80s horror movies, please hold.
Is that a printer I can hear purring away in the background?
Yep, I've got the Lulzbot going, and both of them are going right now. I'm printing the spinal cord on the resin printer and a herniated disc, and I'm printing my head on the Lulzbot. I'm gonna make a food-safe silicone mold so my sister can make bundt cakes.
Oh, nice. And what is that you're doing there that's very noisy?
It was a little lens cloth.
All right.
Is it all crinkly?
It's an acoustic treat for the ASMR folks.
Yeah. So the Columbo episode we watched was one neither Donna or I'd ever seen before.
Oh, that's cool.
It was,
Who was in it? Anyone famous?
Ray Milland and Robert Culp.
Oh, fantastic. Robert Culp is fucking amazing.
Yeah.
You remind me of him.
I've heard that before, that there were doppelgangers.
Yeah.
But he had a detective agency, and he was blackmailing the wife of Ray Milland, and he killed her because he had a really bad temper. He didn't mean to kill her. He got really pissed.
His rag.
Smacked her, and then he hit her in the head.
Is this one when he had a contact lens on the floor?
Yep, that's the one.
Yeah. I love it. That's
the one.
We're both Columbophiles.
Yeah. So one more thing, sir.
Well, that's cool. Well, we have a rather splendid episode this time around. Not that they're not usually splendid, but I'm very pleased about this one. It's very cool.
Oh, yeah. This one was a joy to record, and I'd love to take a class with Adam. I think it would be quite beneficial. He has, no matter how good a sculptor you get to be, I think you can always learn something from somebody else.
You totally can.
And I'm by no means a great sculptor. Adam is amazing, though. Holy crap.
So the episode, if you've seen the episode art, you'd know, but number 72. We're up to number 72, man.
Can you believe that?
I know, it's crazy. I mean, it's only taken us about 8 years to get there, but we are slow and steady.
Yeah. Slow and steady wins the race.
So Adam Beane, who I'll read from his Stan Winston bio. So his Stan Winston School of Character Arts bio says, Adam Beane is a renowned master sculptor known for his highly realistic portraits and dynamic poses. Since he began sculpting, Adam has become internationally recognized for the extraordinary emotive and expressive qualities of his pieces.
Oh, and he does small stuff. Yeah. I think on his website or his Instagram page, he did a head of Matt Damon that's probably not much bigger than a quarter. I mean, it's really small, and it freaking looks exactly like Matt Damon.
Yeah, he does these amazing things, and I was a bit nervous about speaking to him because I've been following his stuff for a while, and one of the things I didn't mention to him, actually, I wish I told him about it, but when I do sculpting sort of demos and stuff or presentations, I have like a group of different sculptors whose work I show to kind of show people the range of what sculpture is, because a lot of people don't really know the kind of range of sculpture. So we'll look at some classic stuff, some Renaissance sculptors and all that kind of stuff, and then look at Evan Penny, who sculpts in like relief and all that kind of stuff, and then I show them the Jordu stuff, and then I show them Adam Beane stuff, because he used to sculpt a lot of really, really small things, miniature. He worked for toys and McFarlane Toys and things like that. So he's there's not many people I've seen that do that kind of stuff, and it's really nice to show people. So for years I've been kind of silently kind of watching and admiring him. So to actually sort of speak to him.
And I sure hope things get there. I would love for CX5, the clay he developed, to be a thing again.
Yes. Yeah, he developed like a clay which was like, it's sculpted like when you heated it, it sculpts like clay, but when it cools, it hardens to a plastic.
Like plastic. Yeah, it's amazing. Kind of like Castelline, but better.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the things that I thought was amazing, as you'll hear when you, I mean, we'll just let you get to the chat and listen to it. But one of the things that was amazing was that he's one of those guys that's done so many jobs, like proper, just like hard work, smelly, working on a factory line jobs, but he always seems to kind of, he's a very good example of someone that just does what they need to do, and then he has stuff left over to think about what happened and how he's going to address it.
Yeah, he has no fear. He'll tackle anything.
Yeah, and it's really nice to see, actually. So it was a lovely chat, and I was really pleased we got to speak to him for as long as we did.
So go to the bathroom before you start listening, because it's a long one.
Yeah, it's gonna be a hefty episode, but that's how we roll. I mean, we don't have like 35-minute or commercial breaks or limitations. It's the beauty of a podcast. You just suck it up and enjoy. So yeah.
Hope you enjoyed as much as we did recording it.
Can we talk a little bit about how you got into sculpting? What was it? Did you meet someone, or was it a formative person at school, or were you just always into making stuff with clay, or was it just something you did suddenly one day and discovered, holy shit, I like sculpting? Or
yeah, it's always hard to know exactly how to answer a question like that, because there's so many places where a story could start. I suppose we've got some time here. This is a podcast, so I suppose I'd say, because I'm used to giving sort of soundbite answers, and the soundbite answer is, a little bit more of, like, oh, I've always been interested in sculpting, and then I had an opportunity. But the sort of more in-depth answer is, I've been interested in art. My mom used to tell me I was drawing from the moment I could hold a pencil, and it was always drawing. It was about like hyper-realistic drawing for me for years and years and years. And then at a summer camp one day in Freedom, New Hampshire, a friend brought in a magazine called Bizarro. It was Tom Savini's Bizarro. And this is, shortly after Friday the 13th came out. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is what I want to do with my life. And that sort of like vision for my future held until I was graduating high school. And I heard that, Lucas went like basically totally digital. And it was such a bummer to me. Like, I was like, I don't want to spend my days sitting in front of a computer. I want to make things. I want to be, in the shop creating stuff. And so I went a totally different path. I went into industrial design briefly. Decided I didn't like art school after about a year and a half of it. Mm-hmm. And I switched to philosophy. A bit of a story there. I'm not going to bore you with it, but long story short, I was working just like a regular guy, like, working in factories and whatnot, and putting myself, partly putting myself through school for philosophy. And my sister, who lived in New York, was like, hey, why don't you come, if you're going to temp this summer doing factories, why don't you temp in factories down here in New York? She lived in Brooklyn. New York's way more fun than where I was living, which was Providence, Rhode Island at the time. So I moved down to New York for a little bit, and the week I got there, a friend of hers left a sculpture studio, and she was like, hey, you've always been interested in sculpting. Like, why don't you give that a try? And I went and I talked to the guy. He hired me on the spot, never asked for a portfolio. He was just like looking for a warm body to like move stuff around the studio. And then he tried me out on some stuff, and I surprised the hell out of everyone, including myself. And it clicked. It just clicked. And we were doing like bath toys.
That's so cool.
Yeah, we were doing bath toys. We were doing medical training models. So this is my first time really, like, I had done 2 sculpting classes in high school. And then in college, I had done an independent study class, like just one, doing like a self-portrait in clay. And I had done like some like figurative sculpting, but like nothing much. And then that was years ago. And then went into philosophy and all that stuff. And then here I was getting paid to make things for the first time ever. I was like, it was unbelievable. It was just the coolest feeling. Like, even if it was like little bath toys, I was like, I can't, or, one of my first sculptures ever was sculpting Pokemon. And I don't know anything about Pokemon. I don't care about it, but it was like cool to be getting paid to make something with my hands. I just couldn't believe it. Mm-hmm. So that's how it started.
So it's a real sink or swim thing for you. It was just like, get this stuff done.
I'm a firm believer that there are no accidents.
I'll take issue with you. I'm a firm believer in that if you wait long enough, you can ascribe meaning to anything.
Yeah.
Like something retrospective, right? Like fate is always retrospective. Like if you wait until some good event happens, then you get to that inflection point. You get to look backward and be like, see, this is why that happened.
Yeah.
But all the way up until that good thing happens, it's just like, why did this happen to me?
Yeah.
But if it hadn't worked out, I just would have gone back to, I've worked in more factories than you can shake a stick at. And I've worked as an exterminator. I've worked at, pumped gas. I've, flipped chickens as a short order cook.
All of those experiences had to have come together to help focus where you are now in some way.
I think
the more experience you have, the more able you are to fine tune your own direction.
At the very least, it's humbling. I've done a lot of manual labor, like, and I actually, I really liked doing landscaping. You're outside, you're moving stuff around, you're getting exercise. But some of the jobs that are really bad, like fumigating, pumping gas, some of the factories I worked in, swing shift in a thermoforming department of an industrial waste liner company, those are jobs nobody wants those. Nobody wants those jobs. And it's that much sweeter when you get your first job making something, even if you're sculpting side duck. You're like, okay, yeah, this beats the swing shift in the thermoforming department where, I've had so many jobs where the only thing they ask you is, do you have earplugs? Do you have steel-toed boots? And can you lift 60 pounds with no problem? And if the answer to those three things is yes, you're hired. And so those are like humbling experiences. And it's sort of, I always thought, well, this will give me something to write about someday.
I think working like with your hands and just working a job, like that was just proper graft. I think when you're sculpting and stuff, it's like you're not going to be resistant to that difficulty, because sculpting can be hard work sometimes in terms of not so much physical if you're not working on anything huge, but just the internal kind of like, I don't know, the self-loathing and the difficulty, it not going right and all that kind of stuff. Can we talk a bit about that? Because I know you were saying like you teach sculpting as well. When I've taught, you see, and I don't know if it's true to say a lot nowadays, more so than perhaps before, or it might just be that more people are trying things, but there's a very real sense of like a lot of people get very frustrated when things don't go right when they're sculpting. Can we sort of pick a bit about the mindset of how that, do you experience that, and how do you approach that with people who they're despondent because it's not going right? And it's like, well, I don't know if it's because so many things nowadays are so streamlined and their apps and everything works out the box straight away that we kind of forgotten that that's not how we're not owed that. It's just that there is difficulty. Anything that's worth having is usually born out of difficulty and great struggle. So some words of wisdom, I think, about that, where your brain goes, goes south.
And I'm not sure that there's an interesting fine distinction to be made there about everything worth having comes with extreme difficulty. I think for me, it feels more worth having if it has come at some expense to you. It's dearer to you. The success is sweeter. And I think that you're going to have a more intimate knowledge of whatever that subject is if you have struggled with it. Mm-hmm. And when I'm teaching sculpting, the first thing that I tell anybody is, well, I start with drawing, by the way. I always start with drawing when I'm teaching sculpting. And I teach how to observe. Drawing is so much easier. And I know that there's so many 2D artists out there who are going to bristle at this, but I've done hyperrealistic drawing. I've done hyperrealistic sculpting. Drawing is like 100 times easier because it only has to be right from one angle. So I start with drawing, and then we, typically make our way into sculpting. And the thing I tell everybody, every student, no matter what their level is, that I've never had I think I can say this completely truthfully. I've never had a project I haven't struggled with mightily. And every sculpture goes through dark hours. And one of the things, like probably the most like wisdom that I can sort of impart is learn to work quickly. And the reason for this is, and I'm always banging this drum, my students will know this, they hear this all the time. If you work quickly, then it didn't take you a long time to make your mistakes. If you spend a long time making a mistake, you're going to be married to that mistake. And because, you know, it's like the sunk cost fallacy, right? Like you've got all this invested in it, you're less likely to scrap it. So if you can learn to work quickly, you know, it's from entrepreneurship, they say fail fast. If you can learn to work quickly, then if you have made a mistake, you don't have much invested in it. And you're more likely to go back and do the thing that it needs in order for it to be corrected. And typically what that needs is to be cut and moved around. And my sculptures, I'm always cutting them up and I'm moving things around and I'm switching stuff, and I get in there and I really, really tinker with them. This is one of the reasons I like to sculpt without armatures, you know, because I can just slice them up and slap them back together. But yeah, dark hours, man. Every project has dark hours where you're like, and I don't know if like on a big project or like a really, really like super realistic thing that I'm working on, clothing folds, you know, portrait, there's always that time where I'm like, who the hell let me do this? like there's a Gary Larson cartoon. I don't know if either of you are familiar with The Far Side. An elephant is sitting on stage in front of a grand piano. And the thought bubble, he's thinking, Christ, what am I doing here? I'm a flutist, for Christ's sakes. And I always feel like that at some point during the sculpture, like what the hell am I doing here?
I think that's going to be quite gratifying for people to hear when they see pictures of your work and realize that that's what's behind it. It's not just this effortless thing that just, you know, you drop the clay and by the time it hits the ground, it's kind of roughed itself out. It's like, no, everything's.
Yeah. And I you know, I've had those where I remember I was doing, like, sometimes, and it's interesting with portraiture, sometimes it just comes together like that. Mm-hmm. Fastest I've ever gotten a portrait, I don't mean like I just posted a Bjork rough on my Instagram. That was a half-hour sketch.
That was amazing for half
and
an hour.
Oh, thank you very much. I said 45 minutes. I think it was actually half an hour. I said in the post, I said 45 minutes.
But even for an hour.
Actually, in reality, I think it was.
Yeah, and it was very, very.
But and that's a sketch, and there's like loads of things wrong with it, you know. Mm-hmm. But the fastest I've ever gotten a portrait, like, that's pretty close to done, was 3 hours. And that was, I think her name was Arlie Shoshan. I think she was a actress. She portrayed, and forgive me if I say this wrong, a Twi'lek, I think, in Star Wars. Right. I think that's how they pronounce it. Sometimes portraits just they come together, and then sometimes, and it really depends on the person's face. Like some people's faces are so much more expressive than other people's faces. And it's just like Robin Williams, you know, his face changes from frame to frame. Practically, he looks like different people. And you're like, oh, it's because he has a rubber face. And you're like, well, yeah, Jim Carrey, though. Jim Carrey doesn't. Like, he looks like Jim Carrey in every frame. Like, it's not that confusing. So, yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting process.
What do you find to be the most difficult thing about doing likenesses?
That's an interesting question. I don't think anybody's ever asked me that because it's just assumed it's all difficult.
It is for me.
I don't know if there's okay. All right, here we go. This is something that my sculpture students will also be familiar with. So I have a lot of theories because I'm largely self-taught. And I want to be careful when I say that because nobody exists in a vacuum, right? We're all standing on other people's shoulders. I didn't study officially sculpture, a course of sculpture study at a school. I'm not nearly as familiar with the masters as I should be, and embarrassed to admit that. I'm still learning the names of muscles. I'm embarrassed to admit that too. I've never done an egg crochet figure in my life, but so I'm self-taught to the extent that like I come from toys and then I started sculpting people, and I was like dynamite at it right out of the gate. So there, you know, obviously there's like aptitudes, right? Not everybody can be like Lance Armstrong when they hop on a bicycle. So I have come up with my own theories about things, and I don't know if they're reflected in sort of like the popular mainstream of how people learn sculpting. I don't think they are, because I've never heard anybody talk about this stuff. So one of the things that I've come to is what I call visual magnets. And visual magnets are things that will drag your sculpture off true. I had the experience when I was starting out of just trying to get, I don't remember who I was working on, but there was someone's nose or their lips that weren't right. It just wasn't. And I was like, I can't believe that I'm doing it wrong for this long. Like, I know that I'm accurately portraying this person's mouth. Like, this is insane. But it kept looking wrong. Finally, I was like, screw it. I'm going on to something else. And I fixed his eyes, and boom, his mouth was perfect. And it was such a startling moment for me. And I realized that some other area of your sculpture can be off. And this is why now I teach rough the whole thing in. When I'm sculpting, I imagine it's like coming out of the fog. So I get the whole thing roughed in. If the person has a beard, if they've got big hair, you know, a bouffant, whatever, a beehive, sculpt that thing in. It is insane the number of times I see people sculpt a person bald. I'm like, how are you possibly going to get it correct? And some people are very good at it, and not to take anything away from somebody else's method, but I think you get more life in the sculpture. I think it's more interesting, more engaging if you get their whole character first. Mm-hmm. And keep dialing it in and keep dialing it in. And it's like coming into focus, right? There are some things that are going to mess you up. And those are the things that I call visual magnets. So if somebody has crazy big hair, right? You're not probably going to get the rest of their face correct unless you get that in. It helps you judge proportions. And then the worst, in my opinion, is somebody with high contrast features. So if they have really dark hair, really dark mustache, really dark eyebrows, or, you know, all the time when I'm sculpting women who have a lot of mascara, like I just did a quick sculpture of Kristen Bell. Kristen Bell, her eyes are sort of close set. She puts a lot of eyeliner on the outsides of her eyes to sort of drag her eyes apart visually. You can't sculpt mascara. You can't sculpt dark eyebrows. You can't sculpt a big, heavy, dark mustache. So when I'm starting to sculpt a portrait student out, I'll start them out with a low contrast face. So somebody with dark skin, they won't have, you know, if they have black hair and they have really dark skin, they won't have a high contrast face. If they have really light skin and blonde hair and blonde hair, blonde eyebrows, you know, light blue eyes, or, you know, eyes you can get away with by digging in, right? Sure. So if they have like dark brown eyes, you can dig holes in there. But dark eyebrows, like, what are you going to dig holes? You can. You can like excavate a line in their face. I do that sometimes to just get, and sometimes, you know, I'll take a picture and I'll Photoshop it, you know, like with Kristen Bell, like, you know, is it right? Is it right? I have no idea. And then I'll take a picture of it, Photoshop it, and I'll put on the mascara, and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, nailed it. Or
that's mad, yeah. That's something I've really thought about, but that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you're distracted by the color and the surface, and actually you just need the surface information, but you're obviously
so Stuart, if I were to sculpt you, no problem, because, you know, your beard is light enough and I could faithfully represent that beard. Or if somebody has a dark beard but it's iconic enough, like Stalin, you know, you could, Stalin's got a very iconic sort of look about him. You know, with that mustache. In my memory, it's like a curly Q sort of mustache. I don't think it is quite that, but So if somebody's iconic enough and we're familiar enough, with their face, then you can get away with not having it be the correct visual color. But this is the reason people don't recognize life casts.
Yes.
The moment a face is drained of color, who is it? Especially the women in Hollywood, because we're so accustomed to their look. If you look at, Marilyn Monroe versus Jean, what was her name before she became
Jean
Harlow, right?
Harlow, yeah.
So, if you look at her when she was Jean Harlow without any makeup on, they look like completely different people. Like the person who designed her makeup look did an amazing job with her, like her face as the sort of the blank canvas. They did an absolutely stellar job designing her look, but she looks like a totally different person.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing, is when you are sculpting somebody who has, and this is one of the things I will do, I will take photo reference, and I will, if somebody has really dark eyebrows, blank them out. If somebody has really dark hair, flood it, in Photoshop, flood it with like a lighter color. Try to make their face as monochromatic as possible, and you'll be saving yourself a ton of heartache. Now, that's not possible in real life when you're sculpting someone in real life, but it's a great way to practice.
Yeah, I guess that's something you'd have to learn to ignore, but you could start, like you say, by making those steps to even it out, so it becomes less about the contrast and you can focus on the actual shape of things. And then once there's some stuff there, then you can kind of work into it because you've got something to dig into.
Exactly. So
amazing.
Yeah,
I'm going to give that a try, and I'll let you know how I progress.
Cool.
That's a really good tip. That's not something I'd really consider, because when you were saying about that, I was thinking, in life casts, I've had people like, I had one actress that said that wasn't her face, even though the life cast hadn't left the room. It was like, it's not what you think you look like. This is just the surface topography of your face. And scans.
Oh, it's quite startling. Yeah, it's quite startling. And, because you lose the sort of the bit of translucency that you have to your skin. I remember the first time I saw my life cast, and I don't have the smoothest skin in the world, but when I saw my life cast, I was just like, oh my God, that's a lot of texture right there.
Yeah, I was thinking, like you were saying, like when you look at your own life cast, when you look at a sculpt that you're doing and where someone's working on something that they've done, I think that's the thing, is like you see something's wrong immediately, but obviously you're present through its genesis. You're there as you're making it, and it's quite difficult to sort of make those qualitative decisions as the maker. And like someone else, you could look at somebody else's sculpt and go, oh, the nose is too far forward, that's why they look. When you've done it, it's kind of like you were saying, you're so married, which is why I guess you were saying work quickly, because then you can kind of bounce off of somebody else and then make those decisions because you're not so invested in it.
Well, it's like staring at the sun, isn't it? Like you look away and it's all you can see. You just see the spots in front of your eyes. If you've been staring at that face if you've been staring at the nose for hours, you're not going to see it anymore. It's burned out your retinas. You need to keep it fresh. This is another thing that I always teach, is stand up. You're so much, it just changes your, emotional bearing. You're more willing to make moves, to do things. I see so many sculptors, and when like I've taught at a bunch of schools, and everybody comes in and they're all sitting in chairs waiting for me to show them how to sculpt. If I'm doing like special effects or something, and sculpt on their life casts or creature stuff. Like here, and I'm like, number one, everybody's going to stand up, and I don't care. I know it's going to be a long day, but everybody has to stand up. Your energy level is going to be higher. And if your energy level is higher, you're going to make those bold moves. I've seen time and time again where people just tickle a thing. They tickle it and they tickle it and they tickle it. And then they stand up and boom, their arms are moving more. They're making bigger movements. And when you stand up, you can stand back from it. It's a great way to get a new perspective.
Yeah, and you can
stand up, stand back. This is, everybody I work with has heard me say to them, stand up, stand back.
That's a really good piece of advice.
I like to look at the sculpture upside down as well, because we're so used to seeing things. It's like when you shine a flashlight up underneath your face, it changes the whole dynamic of the way you look, because we're so used to being illuminated from above. If you're looking at your sculpture and you see something doesn't feel right and you don't quite know what it is, turn it upside down. Oh yeah, the left nostril is
There you go. Yeah.
not flared as much as the right, but you don't notice it when you're looking at it normally. But as soon as you flip it upside down, what's wrong with it just stands out like a sore thumb.
As long as you also flip your reference upside down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same with the mirror. I've heard, lots of people working, they'll throw their piece in front of a mirror. I don't, but again, it's one of those things that, whatever works for whomever.
Yeah, you could try it out and see. So it's interesting because you sculpt a lot of like you say, portrait heads and stuff. I haven't really done that much of it. We did a bit of it at school, and we can talk a bit about that in a sec. But with prosthetics and things, one of the things I found is interesting is like you say, working quite quickly to block the shapes out and block the forms. But I think the problem is the difficulty, especially when you're starting out, is you don't see a person as a series of planes or a series of masses. You are distracted by the surface. And what I've done with some reference pictures of the students, I've gotten them we blur the pictures in Photoshop and print those out, so you don't see the detail, you just see the mass forms. And that kind of, and I think that's what you were saying about like working quickly. It's kind of training yourself to not be distracted by the surface that you're seeing, because that's the final thing, and none of that matters if their head's not the right shape. So that's just wallpaper in a crappy wall.
Absolutely the case. And in fact, I think I have something right here. I've got my finger on the pulse of a lot of different fields. So I'm fascinated by what's going on in science. One of my favorite subjects of all time is aerodynamics and acoustics. I guess you could throw in there, and musician, and constantly trying to just like I'm alive. I love being alive. I love just like everything science. I just absorb it. So I came across this study. I don't even remember what I was researching, but I'll show you gentlemen this, and the people at home, I'll give them the link so they could follow this. But if you can see this, I'm holding up a page with two faces on it, and on the left it looks like, what does it look like to you on the left, either of you?
Looks like a guy kind of gritting his teeth,
an angry guy, and on the right looks like a
just a neutral female
face. And then when I bring it up close, they switch places. The neutral female is now on the left, and the guy cutting his teeth is now on the right. Why does that happen? It's an amazing illusion, right?
That is incredible.
Wow. Yeah.
They switch spots. Yeah. It's incredible.
Okay, that's the point. They switch spots. Sorry, I'm looking in the camera on the computer, so left and right is flipped for me.
Yeah. No, it's mental. But, that's so cool.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane, right? And so this is from a study done by Philippe. I'm going to mess up their names. Philippe Shins and Aude Olivia in 1992. They made these hybrid images using high-pass filters and low-pass filters. And essentially what it is they combined these two images, and they became known as Dr. Angry and Mr. Smile. But I think it's actually Mrs. Smile. And they overlaid the details, that's the high-pass filter, over the blurred images, which is the low-pass filter. So your eye can only see the low-pass stuff from far away. You see the shadows, you see the patterns of light and dark. But when you get up close, your mind focuses on the details. And so it's possible to have a sculpture. And I actually want to do this someday. I want to do a sculpture that has someone's details over the forms of someone else's face, so that up close it will look like one person, and far away it'll look like someone else.
Oh man, that'd be amazing.
So
That's such a neat idea.
I want to see that. Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can do it. You can kind of do it with paint on a sculpture, on a life cast, for instance. But
you want to do it sculpturally.
But I would love to do it sculpturally. I don't know if it's possible, but
that would be cool to see.
Wouldn't that be insane?
That would be insane.
you know, what's happening there is, and it's such a like a light bulb moment for my students. Whenever I do that, they're like, what the hell? And it really underlines that point about getting things blocked in correctly and standing back from it and squinting your eyes. When you squint your eyes, you're removing your ability to see the fine details, those fine distinctions. And so start off, stand up, stand back, work big, work fast, squint your eyes, and really get all the stuff blocked in first. Everybody likes to get to the details. Everybody likes to use, you know, like the detail sponges and texture stamps and stuff like that. And I see it in ZBrush too. I see like it's the detail trap, you know, everybody gets trapped because it's kind of fun to make it smooth or to give it some skin wrinkles. But like if the form isn't there to begin with, it's not going to hang together. And it can actually look like two different people.
Yeah. And the form is something you can bang out quite quickly, which is what you're saying, like get that in fast. Yeah, that's a very good endorsement for, like you say, being stood up, because then you will move around and you're not ever focusing on one spot for too long, because it is an entire thing. Because that's what one of the things I had, that sort of like huge realization we did at college, where we had to sculpt first it was a full-size head and shoulders, and then we did a full-size figure. So they paid a model to come in 3 days a week, stand there naked. We, you know, just use plumb lines to measure things and map out, and we had to make an armature, and it was like a 12-week project. And one of the things that really dawned on me when we were sculpting was like, when you sculpt, like, you know, a jaw, it becomes the neck, it becomes the shoulder. They're not separate things. And it's odd, especially if you sort of stop here with a portrait or something. Like, you've got to imagine the thing in its entirety as a single unit. And you're very aware, I think, when you start slapping clay on that, you know, you're putting blobs, and is it in the right place? How do you know? You know what I mean? You become very aware of the actual manufacture of it, which is, again, well, it comes back to, I think, like I say, doing it quickly. So you establish, you know, height and proportions very quickly, because you don't need the details for those things. And as those things are established, more of your brain stops thinking about that stuff and is free to make the smaller decisions, because the big one's already in place. It's not always going to be
absolutely. And you know, I think that in a way, you have to sort of cultivate beginner mind. Beginner mind is sort of a concept from Zen Buddhism. You have to, you know, be tabula rasa. You have to just be a blank slate. And like, we learn as children to make all these distinctions. Like, this is the wall, this is a light switch, this is door and doorknob, you know, this is your body, this is your head, this is your nose, your eyes. And you start having a very disintegrated view of the world and of your body and everything, and seeing it as separate pieces. And I think that if you can kind of cultivate that beginner mind and like look at things with sort of fresh perspective, fresh eyes, and stop making those distinctions. If you can erase the concept of jaw, then you're not going to see this as a line. Nobody can see me doing that except for you two. I'm running my finger down along my jawline. You're not going to see that as a jaw. You're going to see this gradual change in planes from my face to my neck. There really isn't a line there on most people. So yeah, exactly what you're talking about, Stuart. Like, the more you work with it, the more you say like, well, this is interesting. Like, there aren't these hard lines and distinctions where I thought there were. And the best thing that you can kind of do is like stand back and squint and sort of look back and forth between what you've done and the model. That's another thing that I teach that I've kind of come up with. I feel like I'm talking a lot. I know this is an interview type of thing, a podcast, but it's like I'm just sort of like going off.
This is what
it's great information.
No, this is the beauty of it. It's long form conversation. It's not like, you don't get to hear this on TV or radio, because people have schedules and they have times, and you have to be done within 3 minutes, and it's all soundbitey. And so the people that tend to listen to this are interested in this thing, and they may well be sculpting while they're doing it. So
cool. So come up with this technique for sculpting from reference. So there's a school of I guess you could say like a school of faithful representation in painting and in sculpting called sight sizing. And that is, you essentially, whatever you're working on is the same size on your canvas as it is in your visual field. So you set your canvas up here and you're looking at, whatever you're sculpting, like the Parthenon there in the background. And you lay it out on the canvas the exact same size as it is in your visual field. And you can kind of like look back and forth between the two. And you can take measurements in your visual field. You close one eye, so that removes your binocular vision. You take measurements and then you apply them to your canvas. That's sight sizing. Well, I take that one step further and I do flip booking. And flip booking uses your persistence of vision. I'm giving away all my secrets today. The persistence of vision is, it only works if the two images are close enough. So everybody's drawn a flip book. If you haven't, it's, you take a stack of paper and you draw an image that's slightly different from the image on the previous page. Eventually you have a whole stack and you can flip through them and it looks as though, you've made a bouncing ball, or this is how animation works, right? 24, 30, 60 frames per second, whatever it is. Well, your mind is going to reject the subsequent pages if the images are different enough from each other. So you have a rooster on one page and a cow on the next page, your mind is just going to be like, no, it's just a rooster and a cow. But if you have a rooster and then a rooster in a slightly different position on the next page, your mind says, aha, the rooster has moved, which is fascinating when you think about that, like neurologically, what's happening there. Your brain is making an assumption about what it's seeing. It's object permanence, right? We're seeing the same object, it's just in a different position now. So that's sort of the underpinnings of flip book and animation and movies, right? Well, you can do that same thing with sculpting or with drawing. You don't have to trace something in order to trace it. You can use persistence of vision to trace it. And what I mean by that is, if you've got a good enough start on your drawing, if you've laid it out, you're drawing the Parthenon, it's back there in the background, you got your canvas here, you've got it laid out, it's basically the same shape and size, and that's mechanical, and any number of drawing courses can teach you how to do that mechanically. You got it laid out, and then you close one eye, that removes your binocular vision, now you're looking at two flat images, and you flip back and forth between them with your eye, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And eventually you can overlay one over the other. And it's a weird little mental trick that you can do. You can sort of turn your vision into like a little ant that's crawling along the perimeter. And you'll start to see, you've sculpted you've drawn the column, right? And you work your way up, you're flipping back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and you're working your way up the column. And then you'll see it wiggle. It'll wiggle out of true. And you're like, aha, I didn't get that part right because it's wiggling. And you go back and correct it. And now it's nice and steady and sturdy and stable. And you keep working your way up until things stop wiggling. And you can do that same thing with sculpting. You can set your reference up.
That's fucking brilliant.
Thank you. I'm a problem solver. I love just like, I try so many, I'm ADD like you wouldn't believe. Like I'm always trying different things. And, some of them stick, and this one stuck, and it's stuck around for 20 years now. And now I teach it. So you close one eye, you remove your binocular vision, you've printed your reference out bigger than the thing that you plan to sculpt. So now your reference is behind your sculpture, i.e. it's the same size as your sculpture in your visual field because of perspective. So now that you're looking at two things that are the same size, you flip your eye back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And if your sculpture is close to begin with, then you will see things move. Like you'll see the eye droop and pop back up, droop and pop back up. And you're like, aha, I sculpted the eye too low. And you go back and you change it. And when you see it stop wiggling, you got it right.
Yeah.
Now, you have to have the input close enough to begin with. It can't be a rooster and a cow, right? And that part is sort of mechanical. And unfortunately, it takes a lot of training to get your sculpture to that point to begin with. And that's where I teach squint in your eyes, stand up, stand back, block in the large forms first, then go back and, take some rough measurements. But if you can get to that point, you can take it that last 10% with my flip booking technique.
Fantastic. That's a great. That's brilliant.
That is wonderful.
It's very interesting you saying about like the mechanics of drawing, because I remember that at, measuring and using plumb lines and stuff in college, that really helped. And it does seem like that there's two sort of ways of doing something. There's that mechanical side of things, and then there's the kind of the creative stuff. But you inform it with the practical, and it's an interesting one. Do you ever, I don't know, would you ever sculpt things like for fun that are just, you don't get too bogged down in detail, almost like sketches? Do you sculpt sketches
and let the clay inform you what the sculpture's going to be?
Or do you just always, would you have like an end game in sight? I doodle, but I don't know if you doodle with clay, but that's probably the easy thing to do, is it?
I doodle with my writing more than anything else. My sculpting has never been an expression of myself. So it's interesting. A lot of people ask me about my art, and inwardly I cringe because I'm like, this isn't my art. Like nothing. And in fact, I'm known for hyper realism, and the better a job I do, the less of me there is in it. There's no style in it. Ideally, like literally ideally, that is my job. My job is to have no style. My job is to just faithfully represent what's there, which is, purely mechanical. Now, yes, when I'm teaching some sort of like a special effects thing and I do a demo and I'll just come up with something on the spot, some crazy, monster type thing. That is just a matter of like slapping on some clay. I've got like a maybe rough idea of something, and I'll slap on some clay and I'll let that sort of inform me. Which brings me to another theory of mine.
We like a theory.
What was that?
We love a theory. We love it.
All right.
Good theory, yeah.
All right. So, I'll throw this one out there too. Why not? In any face or in any creature, you're going to see and this is something I've just sort of come to from years of doing portraits. You're going to come to see a family of shapes repeating themselves in that face. And that family of shapes is going to be different from the family of shapes that you see in somebody else's face. So, and one of the examples I like to use, I have these great pictures that I've taken. You particularly see it in older people, because aging is like turning up the amplitude on a waveform, right? Like you've got a waveform, it doesn't change the frequency. You can turn up the amplitude. It just means the peaks and valleys are the peaks are higher, the valleys are lower. If you take a face, whatever is there in your 20s and 30s, and you turn up the amplitude on it, then you get that same face in your 40s and 50s and 60s. And you keep turning it up and turning it up, and the things that are shallow go shallower. The things that are, I've seen noses that had a tiny bit of crookedness in them in their 20s. And then by the time they're like 45, 50, it's like, wow, it's kind of a crooked nose now. It wasn't as noticeable back in their 20s. So it's like, it really is like somebody just turned up the volume or the amplitude on those features. So I use a lot of old faces to illustrate this concept of families of shapes, but you really see it in other faces too. Like Tom Petty, perfect example. Everything's very fine on his face. Everything's very crisp and sharp and sort of small and chiseled in this really interesting way. So you'll find a shape, like in someone's face, you might find like a sort of a crescent shape or a paisley shape. And then you'll start looking at their face. And the more you study it, I swear, the more that shape you'll find repeated. You'll see it in the nostril. You'll see it in the corner of the eye, the corner of the mouth. You'll see it in the earlobes. You'll see it in the shape that their eyebrows make. Some people in limbs, for instance, like quote unquote beautiful limbs, have the belly of the muscle tends to be like, like you can see like in the last third of the limb right here. And some people, the belly of the muscle is sort of in the middle of the limb, and they're sort of like thicker looking. That will hold for their whole body. Like you'll never see, if somebody has like sort of a thick looking arm, it would be so weird to see like elegant sort of, these elegant legs where the muscle, the belly of the muscle, the mass of the muscle is in the upper third. That would just be bizarre. So somebody's body plan has repeating shapes, and their face will have repeating shapes. And so that's one of the things that I'm always looking for, and it really comes in creature design. You know, there'll be like a set of shapes. I'm gonna mention something here that I'm sure your younger listeners have no idea what the hell French curves are.
Yeah, from technical drawing. Yeah, remember those?
Yeah. So yeah, right. Like, and you could.
I still got a box of them.
Yeah, yeah. I've still got a bunch of them myself, and there were different French curves, right? Some were like really quite round, and some were sort of I don't know, more longer and like gentler curves. Yeah. So it's those families, like, you know, those families of curves or families of shapes that you'll see in someone's face, like. And if you look, you'll keep seeing it repeated. So when I'm coming up with something just out of the blue, you know, just demonstrating, I'll pick, not consciously really, but like, you know, at this point, it's completely unconscious. You start making a shape, and that informs, as you guys are saying, that, and that'll inform the rest of what you do. But if it's sort of like, I don't know, if it's sort of like triangular, you know, drawn out shapes, it might work, but it might be really also look very out of place to put some very bulbous thing in there.
Yeah, understood.
And that's one of the reasons I see, in my opinion, I see so many makeups fail, is because the person hasn't been true. They may have sculpted a great old man nose, and, you know, it would work on, you know, Harvey Keitel or something, but it wouldn't work on the person that they've sculpted it on. And we react to that stuff. We don't know that we're doing it. I'm making it express. I'm making it explicit what I think is happening. We react to faces positively. We react to faces that have that repetition of forms, that family of forms. And when somebody breaks that family and they take something from somewhere else and they graft it on, it's immediately obvious, even if they did a beautiful job sculpting it, it's beautifully textured, they've run the piece perfectly, they've blended their edges immaculately. You look at it and you go, oh, that's a fake nose. How do you know? How do you know that? You know, because their body wouldn't have grown that way, because it breaks the rule for their body. Their body has a rule. Everybody's body has a rule. Just my theory.
It's frustrating because you know that you know this, but you don't realize it until it's pointed out to you. And you're absolutely right. It's kind of like fractals almost, where it's like they're generative. They have an algorithm, and it's kind of beyond words. You can't necessarily describe it as simply as that when you're looking at it, but you don't need words when you're doing it visually, because you just know. You may start off with triangular, but then it becomes refined, and then you just kind of, it becomes like a thing, and you notice it in a shape, which is why I think once you blocked it out, there's a whole bunch of stuff now that you don't need to concern yourself with. And then that's when the clarity kind of, the missed part of it, and then you're now allowed to see these finer things.
As long as you stay true to the overarching body plan that was in place when you blocked it out. So if it has it big and bulbous and the weight is in the middle instead of the top third, then you're going to want to follow that same sort of plan when you're putting in the details. Otherwise, it won't hang together.
Yeah, it's like
one of the things that I love so much, like I love sculpting, but I love thinking about what's happening, and I love being able to express it and show it to people and teach people in ways that they go, oh, like, wow, that's cool. I never thought about that before. And you get that moment where you reached them and you know that you've changed them forever. That's super cool.
Yeah, it is. That's amazing. That's very cool. And like you were saying at the beginning, it's like observing. It's like really observing. When you see good sculpture, the thing that it's almost like a pang and like a jealousy thing, because you realize that they've seen something that you know is there, but for some reason,
truth,
you kind of know you wouldn't have seen it because they've rendered it. They've obviously seen it thoroughly, in a way that they put it on there, and you can emphasize certain things. But
it's truth. It's truth.
I love those light bulb moments.
Yeah. Are they great?
Yeah.
I think Stuart, what you're talking about is if somebody has captured, there's an essence and a truth that when you see it, you're like, oh yes,
yeah,
they've captured some truth faithfully, and it is, like you say, it's like almost heartbreaking.
It's a weird thing, and it's like finding a room in your house that you didn't know was there. You're like, holy shit, this here was the whole time, but I just didn't know it was there.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? And what else is there that I didn't know about? When you didn't take a couple of those to kind of like, it's like lighting a touch paper. Now you're like, oh my God, what else can I find out? And it's like there's no limit to the things you can find out, and then you become, like you say, where you just like a kid in a candy store, because there's it's just to be discovered.
I think one of my favorite things about sculpture classes has been when I have students who have never touched clay in their life immediately find out that they have a skill, a mad skill that they had no idea was inside them.
So cool.
That is so cool to see.
Very cool.
Yeah. It's really weird. This one. It's like one of the things that shocked the hell out of me was, so I left art school. I was actually asked to leave art school. I went to a
glass of something. I would raise it right now. That's
I went to Rhode Island School of Design, and I just
great school.
I didn't think so. I had a poor opinion of.
Was it a lot of abstract expressionism and huge amounts of crit, where everyone's sort of wandering around with their chins and their fists talking?
It was, well, at the time, neo-Dadaism was really like the thing. Students would bring in just the most, like literally a hubcap and nail it to a wall. And, I'd be there. I'd worked on stuff that was like high concept stuff. It wasn't, I wasn't doing figurative stuff at the time. I was doing I was really trying to get into the spirit of it, like high concept stuff, performance art. One of the students I remember took a very expensive shirt of his and like stretched it on a canvas frame and called that his piece. And I knew he did it literally that morning because he had been partying in New York all weekend, and put it on the wall, and the whole class had to crit it. And I'm like, why are we wasting our time critting something, that this person literally just stuck on a wall, when some of us have been working quite hard and actually, deserve to be critted. So yeah, it was disheartening to say the least. And you can argue, eyes and art is in the eye of the beholder. Art doesn't have to be difficult, et cetera, et cetera. But I think there are real value judgments that can be made and should be made.
I think so, because the danger is that you then, as a concept, you just end up denigrating competency in things, and
absolutely
pisses people off. And there is a place for that. I remember similar feelings at art college. I went to Wimbledon, and they had a fine art section and a theatre section. And in the theatre section, I would have to learn. Like, we went to an automotive college one day a week to learn how to weld, because we were going to weld armatures and they had to function. And then you would see like these welded sculptures, which were just scraps of metal welded together. And I'd look at them and go, well, the gas mix was completely off because it's just spitting everywhere. So it wasn't competently welded. That may have been part of it, I don't know. But I looked at it and like, so my ability to weld wasn't valued there. Yes. And it kind of seemed like, but that's a shame, because you could take that good information of how to weld correctly and then do something structurally sound that is also creative. Yes. But it seemed like, oh, you either have competency in craft or you're very high concept. You cannot have both.
Absolutely.
And I did that.
You nailed it. I had one professor at RISD, this guy, Jack Matthews, I think was his name. And this is the one takeaway that I really valued from that school. He taught the way the thing is what it is what it is. I've never forgotten that. And so if you hang a piece on a wall with, thumbtacks, make no mistake, those thumbtacks are part of your art. And if it is hot glued together, and hot glue is pouring out of the seams of your piece. Like, don't expect your audience to sort of edit it out in their head. Like, no, hot glue is part of your piece. And so that's where craft, you know, I've always been really into the highest level of craft possible, because then your message gets across with no crosstalk. There's no, you know, the signal to noise ratio, there's no noise. If you can eliminate all noise, then it's just 100% signal. So are you saying what you want to be saying? Well, if it's important that there's hot glue, you know, visible in your piece, then yes, you're saying what you want to be saying. And that's what you're, you know, with, if the gas mix is off and it's just spattering everywhere, the weld looks horrendous, then make no mistake, that's part of your piece. And, you know, and unfortunately, and then we can talk about this, and that, you know, you wind up with concept people who hire crafts, you know, like Jeff Koons, right? He just has an inkling of an idea, and he's basically just like a, you know, made a bunch of money on Wall Street and thought it would be cool to commission some art and call it his own.
Yeah.
Essentially. Yeah. Like, somebody got in touch with me to have me sculpt a giant hand, and it just pissed me off. I'm like, it's not yours. You know, then we get into the conversation of authorship.
Yeah.
Because you're hiring people to do your work for you. And it's a, you know, there's gray areas like everything else. But if you literally haven't touched the piece yourself, I don't really know how you can call it your work. But learning the craft, I think, is really, really important, because that's going to inform how you conceive of the piece to begin with, because you'll know the possibilities and limitations of whatever medium, you know, you're working in.
Well, I want to take what you and Stuart have just been talking about, you know, with the welding, and how taking that information and applying it elsewhere to something that you talked about a little while ago, about when you're sculpting, say you're doing something for McFarlane or Marvel or Hasbro, you're doing a job, you're being paid to sculpt a likeness, and you have to be basically neutral. It's none of you is going into it, even though a lot of you is going into that. Have a little discussion about where do you draw the line between commercial art and fine art? Because to me, you know, looking at the pieces that you do, you know, your little Matt Damon head is freaking spot on. I mean, you put some color on that, and that's Matt Damon.
You should try that one of these days.
You know, you're David Bowie from Labyrinth. It's like, holy shit, that's exactly what it looked like. To me, that is every bit commercial art as well as fine art, because you captured the reality of that moment in time from film, making it fine art. But it's also a commercial venture, because it was being, maybe not the Bowie one per se, but, you know, your sports figures, are, people will pay good money to put that into a collection. Is that fine art or is that commercial art? And it's, you know, because I've had discussions from college. You know, my mentor in college was an abstract watercolorist named Richard Clark, who did just beautiful stuff. This is when I was wrestling with, do I go to medical school, or do I follow my path, because I do what I do because I can't not do it. And, you know, I felt, you know, the whole medical school, that's another conversation for another day. But, you know, Richard helped me find my path when, you know, I had the last dozen or so years, I had been firmly convinced that medicine was my path. You know, maybe it's because I'd been in and out of emergency rooms ever since I was a kid, you know, and, you know, so I figured, you know, if you can't beat them, join them. I think everything happens for a reason, whether we're consciously aware of it or not. You know, our experiences inform who we really are.
Oh, absolutely.
And, you know, it comes back to, you know, I was 12 before I think I realized that not everybody could draw, because my mother is a painter and a sculptor, and my dad did stained glass and wood carving. So, you know, I grew up around that stuff, and I just naturally thought, everybody can do this.
That's your
So
paradigm, isn't it?
I need to do something else.
Your paradigm, because you were
Yeah.
made aware of those things. It's like you were saying, Adam, about like, don't call this a jaw. You are taught to differentiate things. And I guess what you're saying there, Todd, is that you grew up being familiar with these things, so it never occurred to you to not include them in the way you see the world. And so you kind of effortlessly practice them, and then you realize, oh shit, you don't have those at home, or
Yeah, I would write short stories and then illustrate them. That was my childhood.
Yeah, I had a different experience. I think I always grew up. I grew up with. I was always the artist, like like a capital THE at school. So I was always acutely aware of my difference in that regard. I don't know. I think in a weird way, I had to learn to like. I didn't want to be that different, and so I had to learn to sort of really express what I found valuable about in other people, because I didn't want to be like put on a pedestal in that way, because it's othering, right? Like it separates me from my peers, and I didn't want that. Like that's a sad place to be. That's kind of a lonely place to be. And so I was very humble about my skills, and I always tried to I guess just like I said, like be very explicit and express about what I found valuable in my peers and my friends.
I think there's a lot of value in that. I think because if you are, especially if you're in some way rendering what you see either through short stories or you're drawing, you're sculpting, you are observing. So you're completely engaged for periods of time in things other than yourself. And there's a lot of things nowadays, I think more so nowadays with social media and stuff, a lot of people are very preoccupied with themselves and how they look, and how they have a lot of navel gazing, and something about the act of acquiring information in order to render it in some way that stops you from having the time to do that. So it can be quite, what's the word I'm looking for, kind of therapeutic to be able to really engage with the outside world to the extent where you can deconstruct it and reconstruct it in your own vision or your own way, whether it's like you say a ruthless rendition or you want to emphasize something. But that, I think that's harder to do, isn't it? Because you've really got to understand it to eloquently emphasize the right things. Do you want to talk a little bit about CX5? Is that still happening? Is that still a thing?
We can talk. No, basically the short answer is probably not a thing. Unfortunately, like a cool footnote in the history of sculpting materials, but
I never used it, but I saw pictures of it. I saw video of it being used.
Yeah, and I wanted to use it. I was, and when I heard that you were playing around with the idea of doing a PLA filament with it, I was like, oh, this is going to change everything.
Yeah, it would have, unfortunately ran into the realities of trying to do business these days. And this is kind of maybe a different discussion, but the American dream not being what it used to be, like through dint of, hard work and talent and just sheer aggressiveness, you could make it. You could just, that was the dream. And I think the thing that I really proved to myself, 7 years of just, and I grew a company, I had a very small amount of investment up front and worked just incredibly hard and basically never paid myself. And I had a partner at the time, we were life partners as well as, partners in the business. And both of us, she worked incredibly hard. Both of us worked incredibly hard. And the thing that I proved, I think, to myself, and I know this is like an old aphorism, right? It takes money to make money, but I think that's never been truer than it is now. I think that it takes a lot of money to get a venture off the ground and healthy. Mine was always off the ground, but it wasn't healthy in that I wasn't paying myself. And I was working so hard that I literally wound up in the hospital. And, I discovered my limits. Like, that's not something I ever want to do again.
No.
And it lived in this funny area where the return on the investment wasn't appealing enough for investors to really jump at it. Like, big investors, they want they want $1 million investment to begin with. They don't want to touch anything that's smaller than $1 million. It's just not worth it to them. And they want it to be a 5x return or a 10x return. And no art material is going to be a 5x return. It's just not going to be.
Yeah.
And small investors, they didn't really have the capital that we were looking for, and they want too much in return. You know, they want to own some, you know, preposterously large part of it. And so you fall into that strange sort of like area where there aren't really investors that match what your need is. You either need it to be much smaller or much bigger.
Yeah. And that becomes, like you say, it's like a rule of how it's going to be. And it's like, no one's going to do this unless they sink this much money in it. And then when they do, it's like, but it can't make that much. But it's like there's this middle ground that should exist and perhaps did once, but doesn't now. And it just, there must be so many small businesses and really good ideas that are just, they're just not going to get the wing, you know, the wind under their wings because of how it's all set up. Very frustrating.
Yeah.
But you found your limits.
It's absolutely.
And you, like anything, you're going to respond and you just come back, and now you'll be doing, presumably you're doing other things. You're not going to, you know, you get knocked on your ass by stuff, but you come back, you're like, well, you know, still got this energy.
And that, you know, like, honestly, like that's, if the right person came along and they said, you know, hey, let's get the band back together, essentially, to me, you know, this is sort of my last, I'm basically taking it out back and shooting it in the head this year. Unfortunately, there's still some conversations happening, sort of back burner conversations happening, but you know, it's a big, getting that machine going again. And by the way, like, I built all the machinery, literally built the machinery, built and designed the machinery for the production line. You know, I wound up, you know, like I was programming processor, you know, it was like digitally controlled every aspect of this thing. I literally built the machinery for it. So it was all one of a kind prototype machinery. You know, that's the kind of thing that you have to do. I don't think I've ever met anybody as crazy and tenacious as me and willing to put that much on the line and that much work into it. Like, we're talking every day is a 14-hour day, you know, or 12. If you've never done a 14-hour day in your life, like, you can't imagine back to back to back, and some of them no sleep. You know, you're building the machinery yourself, because to buy the correct equipment, just to buy one of these damn things, you know, we're talking $350,000 to $500,000. But I can make it for, you know, $5,000 or $10,000. But it's a ton of my know-how and time. And, you know, if you don't have the money, then all you have is your time. The only way to buy your own time is to not sleep and not eat a lot.
Yeah, so you're paying for it in a different way. And it's different. It's different from just working, like, you know, a 14-hour day for a job, because you don't have a guaranteed end point. There's no you know what I mean?
Yes.
You're there's that whispering voice in the back of your head, like, and you've got to drive on despite that, or because of it, maybe, but you don't let that beat you up. So my previous point of, like, how do you get people to move past when they get stuck in a sculpture? It's like, I guess the thing is to experience harder things so that the very, very small aberration easily overcome. Like, if that's not in your plans, then you got a good life.
Puts it in perspective for sure.
Yeah, and I think we do live in an age, as you were saying earlier, Stuart, where people expect things to work out of the box, and I don't know. It's funny. I've had two experiences. Like, a lot of people like to bang on, you know, the millennials, like they don't have a work ethic, blah blah blah. And I'm like, I have not found that to be true. I have found my students, some of them, it's a mix, right? Like, I think you go back 20 years, you're going to find a mix. You go back 30, 40 years, you're going to find a mix. There's always going to be lazy people. And there's always going to be people who just crush it and just knock it out of the park. Yeah. I really haven't found millennials to be lazy at all, but they do have different sets of expectations. I think they're more than willing to put in a ton of work, but doing things by hand versus, you know, finding the app to do the thing is sort of a slightly, like, I've seen like a little bit of a shift, you know, like I've seen these gorgeous pieces of illustration that look like they were watercolored. I mean, they look for all the world like they were watercolored. And it turns out they were done on an iPad in Procreate because they have watercolor brushes. And it's just, it pains me because when they don't have the knowledge in themselves of how to actually watercolor something, and when that app is no longer supported, they won't be able to make that thing anymore.
Yeah.
And everybody just relies on, like ZBrush, like, oh my God, you can do incredible things in it. And they're going to come out with something even better, next year. Like there's going to be something that will, eat ZBrush's breakfast, right? And until what? Like, what's the end game? Like, until honestly, human operators are no longer needed to create the things.
It's funny because you said that I've seen adverts on Facebook for like AI art, and I was thinking, if you're a programmer or you're coming up with the algorithms to create that, I can completely understand why you would be compelled to want to create those things. But it's a weird one where you go, oh, good, another thing that a human being doesn't need to do. It's like, part of the joy of eating is eating. I don't eat just to get nourishment. And if you could condense all the calories and nutrition into a pill, would you do that? And it's kind of like, well, I kind of like eating and the preparation and there's a lot you can do with it. It's not just about the acquisition of nutrients. So, and it's a bit like that about the art.
Absolutely.
It's like, I don't know. It's a bit of a weird one, but it raises an interesting question. I don't have an answer for that, but
I think the process is part of the joy.
Yes, it is. It's the meaning. That's it's like you say, it's like you render something sculptural and you go through that experience of sculpting something and trying to make something, and then it's
like I said earlier, we do what we do because we can't not do it. That's what you're saying is that's the whole thing.
It's that desire to bypass the toil of doing it. And I'm kind of like, yeah, you can bypass the toil of doing certain things, but there's actually huge value in doing them. Like we have cars, so we don't have to walk 20 miles to the store anymore. But if you could walk 20 miles a day, you would have benefits that you wouldn't. Do you know what I mean? So there are certain things that you can incorporate in your existence, which don't just rely on whatever the convenience is. I shall adopt it wholesale.
I'm writing an article right now about what certain powerful aspects of deep learning are doing to the industry, the special effects industry, and it's sort of like, where is this all going? I was hanging out with somebody in a shop. We just happened to both be in the same shop at that day, and we don't really cross paths that frequently in real life. And we got on this conversation about the old ways and versus new stuff. And he said to me, "Where is it all going to end?" And I went home thinking about that, and I was like, "Yeah, the answer to that's not good." And so I'm writing an article right now about that very thing. And I don't know when I'll be done with it, but with these generative adversarial networks that you give them data sets and they learn on them and they create something, it's absolutely breathtakingly photorealistic. And then there's, the deep fake technology that can replace somebody's face in real time. There's all of this stuff. How does it all come together? And the answer is, essentially, it's going to remove human operators. And when the AIs become like an AI can score a piece of music just almost as well as a human, but soon better. And an AI, it's all data sets, right? Like what we respond
Skynet,
to,
baby.
Yeah, what we respond to visually is not a very complicated data set. Like we like certain compositions, we like certain colors next to each other. That's very learnable. For an AI, very learnable. It's eminently doable. And when an AI can make a piece of art better than we can, which is coming, like make no mistake, that is absolutely definitely coming. What does it mean to be human at that point? Because to be human is like one of the, I would say, like the sort of core things is to express ourselves. We all want to express ourselves. And when something can express itself, or it can, do a better job of painting that painting or writing a moving poem, or
I don't remember where I read it, but I read somewhere that human evolution will ultimately become to the point where we are literally no longer human, because we have become the AI. Essentially, we're already getting microchip now, and it's titanium hip joints and, bionic this and that, pacemakers and all of these electro things that are controlling blood pressure and, different aspects of our biology, that ultimately we will stop being biological creatures.
You're still doing stuff and commissions, you're teaching as well, so
yeah.
You're keeping yourself busy.
I'm always busy. Yeah, so I'm doing commissions. I do some private commissions, but I don't tend to really work with like private collectors or stuff all that much. I tend mostly to work with companies. Mm-hmm. So yeah, doing all kinds of sculpting. I actually just finished teaching a toy design class that I designed for Laguna College of Art and Design, and I'm doing
that was fun.
Yeah, it was weird because it was, everything's remote right now. So teaching remotely, and I'm teaching private sculpting lessons remotely, and that's weird. Mm-hmm. Because you're used to, as a teacher, you're used to being able to go up to someone's sculpture and be like, no, right here.
Yes, such a tactile thing. It's horrible, isn't it? And you always would
it's
reach
inherently,
and
do you
touch,
find,
but you can't.
Yeah, you can't reach in, you can't touch, you can't point. So what I'll do sometimes is I have a 2-camera system here. I'll take the camera, point it at the screen, and then I'll touch the part of their sculpture on the screen that I want them to, and it works out all right. I mean, it's surprising. It's actually quite surprising how far I've gotten with my students remotely. And one of the beautiful things about it is they can be anywhere in the world. So, if they're in Buenos Aires, it's okay. It doesn't matter. I can teach them. If they're in France, it's okay. So yeah, I'm doing that. I'm private lessons, teaching at college, commissions. I'm also coaching, coaching people. Like it's kind of more like career coaching, and also just critiquing their work. Like a lot, people come to me and it's less lessons, but it's more like, how can I take this and make it so good that I get hired? Mm-hmm. So coaching. And then I'm about to launch a Patreon.
Oh, fantastic.
We're going to see how that goes.
Awesome.
I've had people for years saying that they wanted me to do a Patreon or Gumroad or Twitch. And I just never been sure how what would I do for it? I finally figured it out. I think I'm going to have people join me for some live sculpting, watch me sculpt some stuff on Patreon. Once a month, I'm going to give away some piece of art. And I'm just going to post a lot of behind the scenes stuff, stuff that I've worked on in the past, stuff I'm working on now, and be more interactive. One of the things I really want to do this year is put myself out there so that people can kind of get a sense of who I am. Because I think I've kind of, for a long time, just been I've always been kind of a behind the scenes person, not I don't think people have that good a sense of what my personality is or who I am. So
I think they might have a little better idea after they listen to this.
Yeah, and I hope it's a good idea. I hope it's good.
I think
I'm enjoying it.
Thank you. Like you say, you've kind of been your own boss for all this time, and you run things the way you run them, and it's working out. And it's that's what you should do, because that's who you are, and that's what you'll be. That's the authentic you that people will see if they meet you at a trade show or if it's an online thing. Do you have any details of your Patreon? We should just a little thing about Patreon in case you didn't know what a Patreon is, because people listening to this maybe know. There's a couple of podcasts I support with Patreon because I get a lot out of them, and it's just a way of it's like a digital tip jar, I suppose, is one way of looking at it, or
it can be. I think that's for so I guess they're taking their name from patron, and who knows who knows what it's a portmanteau of patron and something else. So the patron idea is that some wealthy patron would support some artist, and the artist and typically it was religious, right? It was the church. But in this case, it's crowdsourced patrons supporting an artist. But it's less about so the tip jar is just hey, we like what you do, just keep doing it. And they put, $1 in. I think that we live in a culture that we tend to want more back and are less interested in supporting causes because they're worth supporting. You'll support that charity if you get the cool coffee cup, And so it's a little bit more give and take. And I'm trying to think of, ways that I can make that a really cool and fun and worthy exchange for people.
No way. Do you have details of your Patreon yet, or we can put links in, or do you want to get back to us when that's up and running?
So I'm hopefully going to get it up running tomorrow.
Okay.
But yeah, I was like, these guys are going to chat with me. I better have this thing.
No,
because I've been chewing on it for months.
Realistically, it's probably at least a week away from coming out this podcast.
Oh, good.
So you got plenty of time. So we can put the link in for that, but that would be awesome, I think.
Like, I think everybody thinks I just do portraits and sports sculptures, but I do a lot of different kinds of art. And so who knows what it's going to be, but it's going to be cool. I know that, whatever it is each month. And then also exclusive looks behind the scenes and at past and current projects. And I think I'm going to put together some sort of a Discord community where people can like talk to me a little bit more. It'll be a more interactive. I'm also going to be doing coaching and critiques of people's work. So it'll be an opportunity for people to like further develop their skills and get some feedback from me. I love the coaching. Coaching is just so cool. Like you can probably tell, like I have a lot of opinions about things and like how sculptures are like can be impactful and whatnot.
Yeah, but you clearly also think a lot about what you're discussing, and I think that's really important, and breaking it down and having a really good, not detached, but you're able to detach from it in order to see it and assess it, which is, I think, important, particularly when it's work. Because if you are a sculptor and you produce something and I say, look, Adam, I did this, you are going to show this with a whole bunch of inbuilt biases and blinkers up about certain things that you will see certain things that you shouldn't, and you won't see certain things that you really should. And it'll be really good that you can have someone like yourself that understands that, and also understands the pragmatic nature of seeing form and shape and being able to put those things together. And you really do need a one-to-one, really, even if it's only 5 minutes, it's enough to kind of set you on the right track, because otherwise you just end up folding yourself over and over
so
again.
Much so.
Yeah.
I've had, there's a student I was mentoring for a number of months, and we do get into that stuff where I'm like, you really I love digging deep into what's happening with the figure in motion and ways that you can really get in there and really sell that motion and make it really realistic and think about it. And I like to give people like ways that they can think about the different forms of the body and the weight distribution and keep it from being really stiff and stale and get it really to be a more dynamic composition. That's the stuff that makes pieces really stick out and really stand head and shoulders above others. And sometimes it's a simple tweak. It's possible in ZBrush, unfortunately, particularly, to take a really nicely constructed T-pose body and put it in some pose that's like, at first glance, it's like kind of convincing, especially if it's like the surface details and whatnot are well rendered, and the cloth, the drapery is good. But then, you look at it. In particular, I like to look at things and I'm like, yeah, that's not really what the body would do though. When you're giving a karate kick, like actually the other arm drops down and this one comes up to your face. It's, if you're throwing a thing like, oh, actually, no, you twist the other way, or you're walking like, no, you've got the wrong hip dropped.
I know exactly what you mean. The way I would sort of liken it is, I remember I was working on a film. I won't say what it was, but I remember seeing the visual effects department. We were looking around all this stuff, and they had all these beautifully rendered sculptures of stuff that the visual effects department had done of these creatures. But you could tell that the people who used it knew the software really well, but they weren't sculptors. You could just see in how they done it that they spent a lot of time getting the lighting looking cool and all that kind of. It had the sheen of, and it would probably impress investors and all that kind of stuff. But you look at it and you go, yeah, but I just don't believe it. And you'd see like a thumbnail sketch of like Carlos Fuente's done or something and go, that's the stuff right there. That's just, 20 pencil lines. That's
because he did it with pencil and he knows his stuff.
Yeah.
And he's a super cool guy too. Yeah, absolutely. And I see that in people who are well regarded in the industry. I look at their stuff and I'm like, no, that's not, no, you didn't. But like, it feels to me like such a fine distinction, and this is going to sound, all right, this is going to sound like hubris here. So everybody please forgive me for saying this, but if there's certain sculptures I'm thinking of in particular that like are sculpted by people who are well regarded, where let's say it would be possible, somebody could come in and sculpt it with those things in mind, and side by side, they would look very similar, but I hope this is true, that people would react to this other sculpture that the new person came in and sculpted. Like, so say there's like a fawn, dancing, let's say, and I look at that sculpture, I'm like, no, you got the wrong shoulder is up. Like that is not, if you were going to do that movement, you'd have the other shoulder up.
Yeah.
And so I would go in and I would sculpt it. and I hope this is true. My hope is that people would react more favorably to the sculpture that I did, not even be able to articulate why. There's just a correctness to it. You look at it and you go, yep. And it's that thing that you were talking about, Stuart. You look at it and somebody's captured some essential truth and it's missing from the other one. For these people who are, crushing, doing some stuff in ZBrush and it's so impressive and they've got, thousands of likes and shares, and it's like, yeah, but you've missed the essential truth of that thing.
It's like you've let the software do the heavy lifting, and your absence of effort is actually showing when you see something that has been done by effort. But you need to see a lot of that in order to compare it. And I think,
but also, I used to love to like bang on software, pixel jockeys, I would call them, versus anybody who's doing things in the real world. But I don't think that's necessarily the problem. Like, I've seen people struggle and like work incredibly hard on something in real life with real clay and still get the wrong shoulder up and still get the wrong hip dropped. So you can make the mistake in any medium. It's not the fault necessarily of the software being easy. It is easier to make the mistake. I will give you that. It's easier to make, and also because it's something like ZBrush, it's so powerful. You can move the body like it's nothing, literally like it's nothing. You could never do that in clay. So you can make a bigger mistake faster in ZBrush.
Yeah.
A big core, like deeply problematic mistake very quickly in ZBrush, where Todd.
Been there.
Yep. Yeah, no, that feeling. But yeah, no, I think it's just because you can work so quickly and things like symmetry, it's just the potential to be lazy exists in a way that you don't get with clay, because the other shoulder isn't sculpting itself, so you have
right, that's so true.
So it's not that ZBrush makes you lazy, it's just that you can't be as lazy unless you have ZBrush. So you'll certainly work hard, but I guess you don't notice the benefits after a while because you get used to having it. And then it's like when you pick up clay, you're like, oh my God, the other side, I've got to sculpt it as well. I'm so used to just
that other shoulder
having the asymmetry.
That's hilarious. And it's so true.
Which is a nightmare. I'll put you on the spot. We're coming up to about 2 hours, so I think I should probably wind this.
Oh my God.
I know, it's been awesome. If I'm listening to this and I'm somebody that's seen some of your pictures and I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing, I want to start sculpting, what would you recommend to start out? What would be like a low cost way of just getting my hands dirty and just start sculpting? I'll give you a thing that I always recommend. For example, rather than just leave you hanging there, I would say to people, try doing self-portraits, getting a block of clay and a board and just doing like your face, just self-portraits, because you will always show up, and just spend half an hour, just trying to sculpt yourself. And that's a way of getting your hands dirty. So you start doing it, I don't know.
Cool. Good answer. Thanks.
I didn't want to leave you. I didn't want to give you this like, oh God, I don't know. But what would you say was?
No. I'm never at a loss for words. I'm, as you can probably tell. Well, I think for me, it would depend on what they wanted to sculpt. If they want to sculpt, a lot of people don't want to sculpt faces, or faces aren't that important to them. So if they want to sculpt like a person in action, they want to make a daredevil, sculpture or whatever. So that's a very different answer than, if you want to get good at portraits. So I guess I could answer both of them, but that would be twice as long an answer. Which what do you think? Like somebody just wants to get into sculpting for the first time.
Well, I think that's a very important point that you raise, is like, but what is it that you actually want? Is it just the satisfaction of having created something, or do you it's of utility to analyze what it is you want? I think that's a really good point. Like what is it you want to see? Like what would make you happy if it's on the bench that you were responsible for? Because like you say, not everyone's going to be into portraits, or that's me throwing on my bias. It's like you could be wanting to sculpt armor or make models of, I don't know,
or animals,
or wounds. We get that a lot, is people wanted to do realistic gore.
Oh, and that's the other thing.
Yeah, I think the same.
One of the things that I was really surprised by when I first started teaching, any sort of special effects sculpting, is you have a life cast sitting there already. Like there's already an answer. The answer is right in front of you. It's that person's face, and it's right there. You don't have to do any work at all. All you have to do is apply little bits. I can never stress this enough. Small little bits, keep it subtle, of clay to that thing that's already there. And I've seen people who could sculpt prosthetics like you wouldn't believe on a face, but couldn't sculpt the face to begin with. You know what I mean? So they could sculpt a new nose, or they could sculpt like a swollen eye, or, they could sculpt various parts of the face, like a cleft lip, but they couldn't sculpt. They didn't know. I don't even know if I would say necessarily that they, oh, this is a bit harsh. Part of me wants to say they're not actually.
Oh, we've never been harsh.
Well, it's not my nature to be harsh. I'll leave that up to you guys.
Well, there's firm and there's mean. They're two different things.
Yeah, mean has no place in the world, really. There's no call for anybody to be mean, I don't think, but that's me. It's not real. It's not like sculpting. It's not like you're not creating something from scratch. You don't know the face the way that you know the face when you create it from scratch. So there is sculpting appliances, application things. And I think, and this harkens back to what I was saying about the rhythm of the face, if you're going to do more than just sculpt a swollen eye, if you're going to sculpt something that actually changes someone's face significantly, then I think it's more important that you are familiar with actual real sculpting and the rhythm of the face, the different shapes and forms and the family of forms that can possibly exist in a face. Those are the things you need to know so that you don't wind up creating a nose that doesn't fit on that person's face. I think if somebody wants to learn sculpting in general, like say they're going to have a fine art career, or they're going to have a commercial art career where they want to sculpt, anything from characters, creature maquettes for movies, concept stuff, collectible figures, then I think the actual sculpting is much more important. And I think that if what you want to sculpt is more body-based, then it can be as simple as like, a block of firm plastiline and some armature wire. And if what you really want to sculpt is faces, I think I would even start simpler than a self-portrait. I think self-portrait is like, that's some next level stuff right there. I think I would start with like, one of the things that I like to do is I tell people to go out and find a thing. Like if you want to sculpt action figures, go find an action figure and copy it. I think copying is like a download of information. It is unbelievable how much information. When you copy, if you copy the master's drawings, like Michelangelo's sketches, you learn so much. You get in his head. If you have like a cool little bust of, Martin Luther King or whoever, he came to mind because I was thinking about Martin Luther King just the other day. If you have a bust of whomever, a little bust, try to copy that. Mm-hmm. It's so much easier because it's not going to move. It's not a face you're super familiar with and think that you know, but you don't really. There's no coloration to be removed. Like it's already monochromatic. Those right there, that's like, instantly removes so much of the difficulty of the task. And then it'll stay there for, hours and hours and hours, days and days, months and months, while you tinker with it. and it'll never get tired. So, and it can be really cheap, you know, it can be anything. It could be anything. You could go to a thrift store and find something for $15 and bring it home and just try to copy it. The more things you copy, it almost doesn't even matter what it is. If you can faithfully copy it, you are learning.
That is some sound advice, I think. That's fantastic.
Cool.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
I'm really excited. That's awesome.
Quite informative. Yeah.
Cool.
I know I can't speak for our listeners, but I have learned a lot.
Oh, cool.
No,
that's
that's
fantastic. I'm so glad.
Oh, it's been a very, very cool chat. I just feel I'm very conscious of the time because we spent so long trying to get this organized, and then the things weren't working, the links were being weird and everything. So it's
no worries.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to have put you through that at the beginning, but it didn't seem to have dampened your spirits. So that's awesome.
No, not at all. It takes a lot to dampen my spirits, believe me.
I hope we'll get a chance to do a part 2 at some point, because I think we've only scratched the surface of what we could be talking about that our listeners would enjoy.
I think so. I think maybe we'll give it a while for your Patreon to sort of kick in, and then we'll come back and check in with you again in the future, if that's okay.
Yeah, sounds great.
Awesome. Amazing. Cool. Thank you.
Adam, thanks a ton, man.
My God, thank you guys. Thank you so much for having me on. I really, really appreciate it. I'm honored.
Oh man, it was awesome. It was so much fun.
We're thrilled to be able to do this, and it's the day started out pretty good and kind of went south a little bit, and this has picked it right back up again.
Oh, fantastic.
This has turned into exactly what I hoped it would. So that was brilliant.
Fantastic. I'm so glad. I'm really glad I could be a part of this. I really appreciate it.
I thought that was awesome stuff, and I'm very, very grateful to Adam for us, for us to get a chance to chat.
Definitely makes me want to try sculpting something small to see.
It does, yeah. I mean, how do you feel about sculpting things in miniature versus sculpting them digitally and then printing them? Because it's going to save your eyes in a way. It's the same process.
Absolutely,
though.
Yeah.
I don't know, but there's something about actually sculpting small that is interesting. I mean, there's something really nice about, like he says, there's nothing quite like getting your hands on clay, and actually moving it around.
Exactly, yeah. I still love digital work, but there's nothing like the tangibility of clay, whether it's monster clay or Chavant or wed clay.
Yeah.
It's just nice to get it under your fingernails and you have to pick it out.
Have you used the monster clay gray?
Yes, I have.
Is it any good? How is it?
Yeah, I like it a lot.
I'm gonna have to try.
It's very nice. It's got a slightly different texture than the brown stuff, than the rust colored stuff. But I like it very much, and it's really close in color to the smooth on freeform air.
Right. Okay.
So if you've got a core made out of that, or their gel coat, the epoxy coat gray is a really nice gray. It's very close to the monster clay gray. So if you've got clients that can't distinguish well between the two different colors, it blends nicely. I'm working on a prosthetic inspired by the Dr. Poison makeup from the first Wonder Woman movie with Gal Gadot. And I did that in the monster clay gray, and
oh, nice.
It was real. It actually polishes up very nicely.
Oh, that's cool. That's a nice quality, actually, especially if you powder it. I guess you can get a nice bit of sheen to it.
Yeah,
very nice.
I like working with it, and it melts very quickly.
One quick thing I just want to ask you about today. I did a Zoom class very briefly with a college today, and we had a discussion. It was one of those, somebody asked a question and it led us into a really interesting area, which I hadn't planned to discuss at all. And it crossed over a little bit with what we talked about when we were writing our article for Prosthetics Magazine about how much to charge.
Yeah.
And the question was basically about like asking for stuff and kind of feeling bad about asking for money, or asking for enough money, or asking for enough time. And it basically boiled down to a lack of assertiveness, or a feeling of a lack of assertiveness, and whether that was a prevalent thing. And I kind of posited the notion it is amongst makeup particularly. And I think the reason is twofold. and I'm probably going to get hammered for this, but I'm going to say it anyway.
I think it's
because,
it's prevalent across business in general. I'll let you
yes,
get back to your points, but it's like going into your boss and asking for a raise. Money is a touchy subject, period. I think, even household budgets,
yeah,
it makes people uncomfortable.
yes. Well, I think, I guess the question was, how do you become more assertive? But also, is it true that, or is it common that they feel this way? Because some people are saying, in the past they've had to ask for things and they've either been rejected or they were granted it, but made to feel like something special had happened because they've been paid what they needed or anything like that. And the way I see it a lot, because I teach a lot of makeup schools, and a lot of the people who are on those classes are quite young, and a lot of the things that they're working on run by men. And so I think what it is the men who are initiating these projects don't buy makeup typically, so they don't know how much makeup costs. They will willingly spend a fortune on lenses and camera hire and visual effects because in their minds they can see why that costs money. But they don't understand like that a palette might cost money too. And so there's a pressure there in that the people asking for it, especially the lower budget stuff, they don't realize that just because the budget on the show is low, it still costs money to buy the stuff from the store. And secondly, I think if you're just starting out, you are quite keen to please. You want to make people like you want to be hired again, so the way you do that is by agreeing to everything. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So you agree to it, so you kind of, there's a part of you that feels like that you're going to upset the apple cart if you sort of put your foot down or make it clear. And there are ways of doing it, and I think that this could be another discussion for another episode. We need to speak to some people who would be good to bounce off of about this. I don't want to hijack this very long episode so far with this point, but I just wanted to run it by you that a kind of assertiveness training, or at least examining how it feels when you're in those situations, is a worthwhile exercise before you get into it, just as much as sculpting and molding and sticking on pieces is.
How to get what you need.
Well, how to get what you need and how to pitch what you need in such a way that if someone's not willing to pay it, like for example, one of the things I pointed out is like if you've got a job to do, say you do it for free, say you agree because it's someone you like, or it could be a really good opportunity. And I've done it myself. I've done it for friends and stuff, like I'll do a job for nothing. I don't want to. But
and you're using material from your own stock that you already have.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. Now, if it costs you, say you use, I don't know, 50 quid worth of materials to make something, that is not a lot of money given how much materials cost generally and how much your time should cost that you're not billing for, right? So if they're just paying for the materials, they're getting a good deal. So if you've got like someone wants you to do an effect and you sit down and you work it out and you go, oh, this is a couple of £1,000 worth of work, but I'm going to do it for nothing. But the materials could come to maybe £200 or $200, right? If that's what it costs to do it just for materials, if they're going to bulk at that and they're not prepared to cover the costs of your materials, there's no way in hell they were ever going to pay you the other £1,800 that you should have had to do the job. So
and that could also be a red flag right there to just say, I would love to do this project, but the stars are just not aligned properly.
Well, this is the point. It's kind of like, look, if it's going to cost you £200 to get the materials to do their project, well, one, you're now a producer because you're financing their project. So you're not just a makeup artist, you're actually in the production as far as I'm concerned. But secondly, if they're not going to cover the costs, and so you're worried that you're going to lose the job, whoever else does the job has either got to supply £200 worth of their own materials because it's going to cost them that to replace that, or they've got to buy so it's still going to cost the production the same money because that's the bare minimum is the material it takes to do that. So if they're going to find someone that's going to actually finance it for them, that's not a job, that's a charity, that's a benevolence on your part to do. So you shouldn't be made to feel bad for turning that down. But I think that's the thing, if you know what something costs you to do, like if you want this and I have to go out and spend £100 on materials, it costs £100 to get these materials regardless of who you are. So if you shouldn't feel bad about that cost being covered. And you certainly shouldn't feel bad about being paid what you're worth. But I'm giving the example of doing a job for nothing. You still need those material costs covered, because that is,
they do a job for nothing, but don't lose money.
Yeah, you shouldn't lose money. And there may be good reasons to help somebody out, but like I say, it's just the cost of materials, because that has to be covered. And I think that is a red flag. That is something you shouldn't feel bad about if they won't do it, because if you see it as, but this is what it costs, rather than this is what I want from you, it's kind of like, no, that's reasonable. And if you're not going to pay it, like if I went to a restaurant and loaded up and stuffed my face and said, that was lovely, I don't feel like paying today. That would be lovely if you could do that, but that is not how a restaurant works.
Or I know the the menu says market price, and market price is $55. I'll give you 10.
It's not in a Marrakesh market. So it was an interesting point, and it's something I think would probably be worth addressing in the podcast, and I would like to talk to people about it. I mean, get in touch with us on the podcast. You can drop us an email
at stuartandtodd@gmail.com, or leave us a message on the website,
or leave us a voice message directly on the website. You can leave us a free voice message there.
battleswithbitsofrubber.com.
And that would be good to have a discussion. But there's a few really good tutors that I've spoken to who I think would be excellent people to have on the podcast, specifically to chat about this kind of thing, because they will have been in having run and worked at makeup schools. They will have had a lot of examples of students who people try and take advantage of, and they're good cautionary tales to basically talk about, I think, because I think it's outrageous that it happens. But like I say, the thing is, there are bad people out there, and they will look for weak links in the chain. They will push the chain link fence until they find something that gives, and so it's not uncommon to find people who are full of their own bullshit, who will exploit somebody who is clearly nervous about asking for money, and they
to take advantage of others.
And there's some brilliant ones on Facebook I've screenshot a few ages ago. Someone like massive Hollywood producer, is making this amazing feature. It's going to be huge with all these stars, but we need people for nothing, and you need your own car and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, you're not
provide your own lodging.
Having worked on some rather large productions directed by Spielberg and the like, I can assure you that's not normally the way it's done. So it's like, it's quite funny when you see those things, and if somebody isn't aware of that, it can sound like, because they're so keen to do it, and that people know that and take advantage of it. So I think that
getting in on the ground floor, what a great opportunity.
Exactly. So I think that might be an interesting conversation to have.
I think so too.
Rounding up our conversation, check out Adam Beane's website. So if you go to adambeane.com, you will have seen if you saw the artwork for the episode, but it's Adam ADAM, and Beane is BEANE. It's not without the E, it's with an E. adambeane.com, or his Patreon. He's got a Patreon he just started up, patreon.com/Adam Beane Creates, and his Instagram, which is also Adam Beane Creates. And I really, really, really recommend you follow him on Instagram, because his stuff's amazing and very, very exciting and inspiring stuff.
Well, as you now know, he's a neat guy.
He's indeed. And it was an absolute joy. And that time just flew by. It was awesome.
It did.
Cool.
Well, thanks for listening, everybody.
Yeah, thank you for making it through that far.
We'll talk to you again soon.
You can get in touch through our Facebook page or email us at stuartandtodd@gmail.com. Check the show notes for more information. If you enjoyed this episode, tell someone else and help us grow by sharing it on social media. Thanks for listening.